bag. So again, this is chapter 4, body membranes. So they cover your surfaces of your body, they line body cavities, form sheets that protect your organs. We classify them based on their tissue types. So there's basically 4 body membranes. 3 of them are epithelial tissue. 1 of them is connective tissue. So your cutaneous membranes, your mucous membranes, and your serous membranes are in epithelial tissue. Your synovial membranes are in connective tissue. So what are your cutaneous membranes? Well, that's just your skin. It's considered a dry membrane. Protective boundary, it's the outermost level of your skin. All right, your epidermis, this is superficial to the layers below it. It's made up of stratified squamous epithelium that has keratin, so it's considered keratinized. The dermis that's below the epidermis, or it's deep to the epidermis, is made up mostly of dense connective tissue. Your mucous membranes have a surface epithelium, and the type of surface epithelium will just depend on which site they're located at. The mouth and the esophagus have stratified squamous epithelium. The rest of the digestive tract has simple columnar epithelium. And the connective tissue underneath is loose, and it's called a lamina propria. It lines all the body cavities that are open to the exterior surface of the body. Or that open up to that exterior body surface. They're moist compared to cutaneous membranes. And they are adapted for absorption and secretion. So basically, the whole point of a mucous membrane is to be able to secrete things like mucus and absorb things, okay? So your skin isn't really designed to absorb stuff in, okay? It's usually to keep stuff out. Whereas your mucous membranes will help you absorb. And they can also secrete things like we learned about. The small intestine has goblet cells that secrete mucus that you have in your small intestine lining. You want that there. Your small intestine cells are also designed for absorption, be able to absorb all the food you eat. You also have serous membranes, also known as serosa. So here, the surface of that serous membrane is a layer of simple squamous epithelium. So 1 layer of flat cells. So the layer underneath that, or deep to that, will be a layer of areolar connective tissue. Okay, that was one of the ones that we studied, areolar connective tissue. And this, compared to mucous membranes, serous membranes line open body cavities that are closed to the exterior of the body. And these membranes typically occur in pairs, and those pairs are separated by serous fluid. So they have a visceral layer and a parietal layer. The visceral layer will cover the outside of that organ. And the parietal layer, this is the inner layer, will line the portion of the wall of the ventral body cavity. So basically, well, inner is not really a great way to describe it. So basically you have a visceral layer that covers the organ itself. Then you got a layer that lines the body cavity. So like you have like a layer that covers your lungs. Okay, it covers the lungs themselves. Then you've got a pleural cavity, which is lined by that parietal pleura. Okay, so this surrounds the lungs. So, all right. So this is like a person lying on their back. You got their heart. Okay, crude drawing of the lungs on either side. Okay, so actual lining of the lungs. Okay, that's your visceral layer. Okay. Now surrounding all of that, we've got a layer around it. That's your parietal layer. Okay. It can heal. Doesn't I wouldn't. It's not necessarily like going to grow a whole lung or a whole lobe, but it does have a little bit of healing power, but it doesn't necessarily just regenerate. So, like people that have lung cancer and they've got to take out portions of their lung, you know, they're able to breathe better because those bad portions are gone, but it's never going to be 100%. All right, so a little more on serous membranes. Again, the pleura we just talked about, you'll find them around the lungs. You also have peritoneum around your abdominal cavity. You'll have pericardium around the heart. Okay. But those are all serous membranes. All right, let's talk about the connective tissue membrane, the synovial membrane. It's only made up of connective tissue, no epithelial tissue. What is its role? Well, it lines what we call fibrous capsules that surround your joints. Also lines what we call bursae, which are basically kind of like sacks of pus. And they line the sheaths of tendons. And they can secrete what we call a lubricating fluid. One of the classic places where you'll see these would be in the knee joint. Okay? Why do you think you need synovial membranes in your knee joint? Because of the movement and the pressure of running and jumping and walking, you need those synovial membranes. It can. Part of arthritis is in the inflammation of the joint, and so part of it has to do with, like, if you don't have that cushioning, the bones are touching each other, and that does drive some inflammation. Sometimes you can also have some infection that drives the inflammation as well, but most often it's either, like you said, not producing enough synovial fluid, or there's been some damage to that joint itself so that those bones are touching each other when they shouldn't. So like on your bones, you also, and we're getting more into stuff than we need to, but your bones have basically a layer of protective tissue around them as well. And those can actually get worn, okay, on the ends. And so if that gets worn too, that can also lead to inflammation of the joints. But there's multiple causes. All right. So integumentary system, your skin, as well as derivatives. Remember, skin's also known as cutaneous membrane. Your derivatives are things like your glands, oil glands, sweat glands, but also your hair and your nails. Okay, all considered parts of the integumentary system. So what does your skin do? So It's a layer of protection for the tissues underneath. Okay, it can prevent what we call mechanical damage. You get a bump or you hit something. Protects you from different chemicals like acids and bases. So if you got an acid or base on your skin, it would damage your skin, but that's better than it damaging the inside of your body, if that makes sense. Protects you from bacteria, microorganisms, protects you from ultraviolet radiation, protects you from severe heat or severe cold, and protects your body from drying out. Okay, keratin is a material in your skin, keeps water from leaving. So sometimes people use lotions that say they have keratin in them, right? And so that's the whole point, keep your skin moisturized, right? It's not just putting something soft on your skin, but it's actually putting things in your skin to help you retain water. So the skin helps you retain your body heat. It's actually under the control of the central nervous system, or the nervous system more generally. Helps you excrete things like uric acid and urea. Makes vitamin D, okay? Sunlight hits your skin, makes vitamin D. You have sensory receptors in your skin for things like pain, pressure, temperature, and touch. So what's the structure of your skin? You have an outer layer called the epidermis and an inner layer called the dermis. And we learned a little bit about this in lab this morning, or you will this afternoon. So the tissue underneath, well, that's it. Before we get there, we'll go over the epidermis. So the epidermis or outer layers made up of stratified squamous epithelium. It gets hardened by keratin. We call that either cornified or keratinized. Again, like we said, it helps prevent water loss. Like we said earlier, epithelial tissue is avascular, no blood supply. And the cell type in the skin that's most common is the keratinocyte. And remember, cyte means cell, so it means it's the cell that makes keratin. And the dermis that's deep to the epidermis is made up of dense connective tissue. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the hypodermis that's deep to the dermis. It's considered subcutaneous because it's below the cutaneous tissue. So technically it's not a part of your skin, but it anchors your skin to the organs underneath it. It's mostly made up of adipose tissue or fat cells. And because it's made up of adipose tissue, it serves as a great shock absorber. And it helps to insulate the tissues that are underneath. Fat is a good insulator, okay? That's why bears eat a lot before they hibernate, right? Insulate themselves. Okay, layers of the epidermis. Composed of up to 5 layers. And we'll talk about what those layers are in just a moment. Again, avascular. Again, like we said, keratinocytes, which you see there. Keratin is very fibrous, so it gives the epidermis a tough structure. All right, so we'll start at the deepest level and go to the most superficial. So at the base, or the deepest level, we'll have stratum basale, also known as stratum germinativum. So you can think of it as the level, stratum is a layer. So basal, I'll think of it as base, or the basal level, or germinativum. Germ cells are basically another word for stem cells. Okay, so these are rapidly dividing cells. So the cells go from the bottom to the top, right? So the deepest, it's the deepest layer. Okay, it's next to your dermis. And under a microscope, if you look at the slide, it forms a wavy line, a border, okay, with the dermis. And it actually anchors the dermis to the epidermis. Cells are dividing rapidly here, going through mitosis. Those daughter cells that are made in mitosis get pushed upward, and they go through all the other layers to go to the most superficial layers. Okay, so the next layer, or more superficial layer to the stratum basale, stratum spinosum. And you'll find stratum granulosum and stratum lucidum. And lucidum you'll only see in thick skin, on the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. And these are dead cells from the layers below. So the stratum corneum has to do with all the keratin, right? It's the outermost layer. These are dead cells. They look like shingles, and they're filled up with keratin. Okay. So again, stratum basale, spinosum, granulosum, lucidum, corneum. So if you're like me, those are a bunch of words. I'm going to tell you now, you're probably going to get asked a question. List them from most superficial to the deepest layer, or vice versa. But in order to remember that, let's take a picture of that first. Okay. So corneum, lucidum, granulosum, spinosum, and basale. So this is how I remember it. Yes. It can either be this order or backwards.
Oh, okay.
Depending on which one they're asking you for.
Oh, okay.
So this would be the deepest layer, be most superficial. Now you can say, come, let's get some burritos or whatever it is that you want to put that starts with the letter B. Okay. I've seen a lot of other things there for B's, and that's you and that's your business. I put burgers. All right. So, but whatever helps you remember. All right. So I'm going to give you all a minute and let you all discuss with each other the different layers, and you can talk to each other about that in the order. All right, melanin. So melanin's a pigment produced by cells that make melanin called melanocytes, right? Cytes mean cells. So they have kind of a color spectrum from yellow to brown to black. So where do you find the melanocytes? You're mostly going to see them under a microscope in the stratum basale. Okay. And melanin accumulates in granules, so it forms in clumps inside a membrane. We call those melanosomes. So the amount of melanin produced depends on genetics, right? As well as exposure to sunlight. So kind of just an application of kind of how I want to describe that. Unless you're an albino, everybody makes a certain amount of melanin. Okay, some of us make more melanin than others, but everybody has a certain amount of melanin. Okay, obviously, depending on where you're from, you may have your genetics. You may have genes that have you make more or make less. Okay, but like I said, unless you are albino, you're going to probably be making some melanin. And even in spite of your genetics, you're able to make more melanin if you had more exposure to sunlight. So being out in the hot sun can produce more melanin. People who sit in their tanning beds can make more melanin, right? Yes, it can also lead to cancer. So it has its drawbacks, obviously. So yes, so it does have some other exposure to sunlight can also have some other unintended consequences. So, all right, epidermal dendritic cells, as well as Merkel cells. So the epidermal dendritic cells, their job is to basically tell the immune cells and activate them when there's a threat. So if there's some virus or bacteria in your body, they let the immune cells know and then activate them so they can act. The Merkel cells have to do with your sensory nerve endings. Okay? And they'll basically, their job is to be touch receptors in your skin, called the Merkel disc. So that's how your skin is sensitive to touch. So we talked about the epidermis. Let's talk about the dermis. So dermis is made up of two layers, a papillary layer that's more superficial and a reticular layer that's deeper. So the papillary layer, as the name suggests, has these projections called dermal papillae. So imagine the skin of epidermis is up here somewhere. You have your dermis. Dermis forms these little ridges that are called papillae. And some of these dermal papillae have what we call capillary loops, so they have some blood supply going into them. Other papillae have pain receptors. Some have touch receptors. And interestingly, your fingerprints that help identify who we are also, basically they're made up of films on your skin of sweat, okay? So part of it, yes, you have certain ridges, but part of that's actually some sweat that is dried up on your skin. So deep to the papillary layer is the reticular layer. There you'll find more blood vessels, your sweat glands, and oil glands. You'll also find receptors for pressure. These are lamellar corpuscles. So your sweat and your oil glands are not in your epidermis. Okay, they're in your dermis. Okay, they have ducts that travel up through your epidermis to your skin surface. All right, so the overall dermis structure. So we learned about fibers. We talked about the different tissues. We have collagen fibers and elastic fibers throughout the dermis. Elastic fibers make skin stretchy or able to recoil, give it elasticity. Collagen fibers give skin toughness. So blood vessels, their role is to help your body regulate temperature. Okay? You also have nerves in your dermis, and they help send signals to your central nervous system. So you can regulate, again, things like pain, pressure, temperature, touch. All right, again, pigments. So we talked about melanin already. We have some others. We also have keratin. Okay, it's an orange yellow pigment, right? Associated with certain vegetables, like your carrots. You also have another pigment. We don't think of it as a pigment, but it is hemoglobin. Okay. So blood cells, when we see them and we think that they're red, is because of the presence of hemoglobin. And the extent of how red they are is how much oxygen those hemoglobin molecules are carrying. So what can affect your skin color? Sometimes, again, we have differences. So skin appears red, we call that erythema. Could be just getting embarrassed, your skin turned red. Or it could be some inflammation, some rush of blood to a certain part of the body. Could be high blood pressure or hypertension, fever, increased temperature, or some allergy, some allergic response to something in your body. Another cause is pallor. We also call that blanching. Could be stress related. If you're afraid of something, could be anemia. Okay, low oxygen or low levels of iron, ability to carry oxygen, low blood pressure. If you're not able to get blood flow to a certain area, that can affect skin color. Jaundice is a condition where skin turns yellow. Okay, and it's caused by a disorder in the liver. Okay, also skin can get bruised, right? And get blue or black marks on it. Those are called hematomas, and that blood starts accumulating there to make the bruise. All right, so the appendages, we've talked about the skin itself. Let's talk about some appendages. You have glands, cutaneous glands, and these are exocrine, like your sebaceous glands and your sweat glands, which means they're releasing materials to the skin through a duct. Your hair follicles, and your nails. So for the sebaceous glands or oil glands, they're secreting oil, also known as sebum, sebum sebaceous. Serves as a skin lubricant, keeps the hair from turning brittle. Also can kill bacteria. All right, so most of these sebaceous glands have sebaceous gland ducts, and that allows the sebum to go into a hair follicle, and some of those ducts will actually go to the surface of the skin. These glands get activated at puberty. So what would we associate that with? With these glands that produce oil being activated around puberty, what would we associate that with? Going to your skin, like your face. Acne, pimples, right? Okay. That is a blessing. Not most people do. All right. So appendages also include the sweat glands, also known as sudoriferous glands. All right, say that 3 times. Okay. Yes. Sudoriferous. Yes. All right, y'all got it. So they are the sweat glands. They make sweat. You'll see them all over your skin. They're widely distributed. Okay, these sweat glands can be eccrine. Okay. And if they're eccrine, it means they have a duct that allows that sweat to get to the pore or get to the skin surface through some pore. Okay, so a little more about sweat. Sweat can be, well, it is going to be mostly water. Have some saltiness to it, right? Your sweat is salty. You're losing some electrolytes. You're also going to have some vitamin C in it. Also have some metabolic waste. So your sweating allows you to get rid of some waste products in your body. So in the case of apical glands, which we're going to talk about next, that sweat can also have proteins in it or fatty acids. So sweat, what does it do? Helps you dissipate heat. So most of us sweat when we're really hot, right? So it allows us to cool down and get rid of heat, get rid of waste. Okay? It also helps to inhibit growth of bacteria because it's very acidic. So the odor that we smell when we say someone has BO, right? Body odor, that's the bacteria. Okay, that's the bacteria. So you could say, well, it's not really me who's stinky, it's the bacteria. But that's your point of view, right? So the bacteria on you. So all right, so we cover the eccrine glands. Let's talk about the apical glands. So eccrine, their ducts go to the skin. Apical glands, their ducts go to the hair follicles. Okay, eccrine ducts go to the skin. Apical glands, their ducts go to the hair follicles. Again, these also start functioning more at puberty. Okay, and this is that sweat we talked about that has the fatty acids and proteins, so it can be more milky or yellowish. Okay. All right, so let's talk about hair. Hair is made by hair follicles. So the root of the hair is enclosed inside that follicle. And just like for a plant, the root is where that growth comes from. Yes? The what is outside the skin? So the reticular layer, or? Sure. So I know we talked about reticular layer with the skin earlier, right? So let's go back up. So we had a papillary layer and a reticular layer with the dermis. All right, so the dermis is below. So based on what I've drawn here, here's your epidermis. And here's your skin surface. Okay, and you have the dermis. Most of this is going to, the dermis is going to be papillary layer. So thank you for asking the question. I'm sure a lot of other people were wondering the same thing. All right. At the deeper layer, you have a reticular layer, okay, which is connected to the fatty tissue in the hypodermis. Okay. There's also some fatty tissue in the reticular layer as well, but basically, there's some tissue that this is connected to underneath. Okay. So epidermis, dermis, and then in dermis, papillary, reticular, hypodermis tissue. Okay. So good question. All right. So again, the shaft of your hair is going to project from the surface of the scalp to the skin. So basically it projects out from the surface of your scalp or your skin. Made up of epithelial cells, which are hard and keratinized. Skin, just like your skin has melanocytes, they make your skin have a certain color. Your hair has melanocytes to give your hair a certain color. Okay, and that hair is going to grow in what we call the matrix of a hair bulb in a layer that we call the stratum basale. Okay, so basically the stratum basale layer of the skin, you can actually have projection of hair through it. Okay, and that should make sense because what did we say was found a lot in the stratum basale? You want to remember? It's okay if you don't, but those melanosomes, they have those little membrane sacs that have all the melanin in it. Okay, so they can also give that hair some color. All right, so let's talk about the anatomy of the hair. So in the center of a hair, let's see, there it is. All right, I'll try to get these posted later today. So you have a medulla. So if we look at the center cross section of a hair, we have cortex around it. And the cuticle of your hair is going to be on the outside of that cortex. It's the most heavily keratinized region of your hair, and it gives it its structure. But cortex and medulla. Cortex is like a crown, okay, it surrounds the medulla. Okay, so the hair follicle surrounds the hair root, excuse me, it surrounds the hair root and goes through the dermis and epidermis. You also have an erector pili muscle. This is a layer of smooth muscle. Makes your hair stand up, okay, if you get scared or you're really cold. Okay, you're also going to have sebaceous glands and sweat glands in your skin. So again, looking at a chunk of skin. So again, if we got basically our dermis down here, got some hair follicles going through the dermis and the epidermis. Also have some muscle, erector pili. It helps to make that hair stand up. And you may also have sebaceous glands by it. All right. So I'll give you a minute or a couple minutes to talk about the Equine glands, or your sweat glands, your sebaceous glands, and your hair. So sweat glands, sebaceous glands, and your hair. All right, let's talk about the nails. These are modifications of the epidermis, which obviously are highly keratinized, right? And they're very hard. The stratum basale of your epidermis goes beneath the bed of your nail. And that stratum basale, remember, that's the layer that divides a lot of cell divisions, responsible for growth. And they don't have pigment in them, so they're colorless. Okay, that's why people like to put different colors on them, because we don't come with color on our nails naturally, right? You just kind of see the layers of skin below it. All right. So structures in the nail, and again, you'll see all this in the lab. You have a free edge, right, at the end of your nails. It's not attached to anything. So most of what you see on your nail is considered a nail body. And you have nail folds, which are folds in your skin, obviously, and they overlap the edges of your nail. Okay. So where does growth happen? It occurs from the matrix of your nail. And your nail root's actually embedded in your skin. You don't see the nail root. And your cuticle, it's what we call a proximal nail fold. So it's closer to the base of your hand and projects onto the nail body, okay? So basically, not the white part, but the skin connecting to the white part of your nail is your cuticle. And those of you who probably do a lot of nail care and all that probably know all that anyway. So, all right. Now let's talk about things that can go wrong, like that can disrupt homeostasis, like burns. So you have tissue damage as well as cell death. And it's caused by heat, electricity, things like that, UV radiation, different chemicals. All right, so what can be associated with this? Well, dehydration, because you're destroying the tissue that allows your body to prevent water loss. You lose electrolytes, your body can go into shock. Okay. So obviously you're going to lose body fluids at this point. You could also get exposed to different bacteria. Okay, so those are definitely other risks associated with burns. Another concept, the rule of nines. It's how you determine how serious the burns are. You can divide the area into 11 areas. Allows you to estimate quickly. Each area represents about 9% of your body's surface area. Okay. So what's 9 times 11? 99 is roughly 100, right? So easy way to do it. All right. And the other 1% basically is the area surrounding the genital region or perineum. Okay, so another way of talking about severity of burns is first degree, second degree, and third degree. All right, first degree is also known as partial thickness, where you only damage the epidermis, you get red and swollen skin. It's a second degree burn, also known as partial thickness, but the upper dermis also gets damaged. And you get blisters. If it's a third degree burn, it's considered full thickness because you destroy the entire skin layer. So you destroy the epidermis and the dermis. All right, and the burned area is actually painless. Okay, you've actually destroyed those nerves, okay, in the dermis. Okay, so you're not sensing pain. And skin grafts are necessary at that point because it's not going to heal on its own. Skin turns grayish white or it could turn black. Okay, so how critical are burns? So first degree burns aren't really considered to be critical, but if over 25% of your body has a second degree burn or 10% of your body has a third degree burn, that's considered critical. Okay, and it's also, even if it's not 10%, but you have a third degree burn on the face, hands, or the feet, that's also considered critical. Because obviously those are areas that you really need to work, right? So they would severely compromise your activities of daily living. All right, other homeostatic imbalances. You have infections. So things like athlete's foot, also known as tinea pedis. And that's a fungal infection. So it's caused by a fungus, whereas boils and carbuncles are caused by bacteria. Cold sores caused by a virus. Okay. Different sources. All right. So infections and allergies. So contact dermatitis. You get an allergic reaction if you get exposed. Impetigo, it's based on a bacteria. Psoriasis, okay, another skin issue. Unknown cause. Things like stress, infection, trauma can trigger it, make it worse. Okay, what about cancer in skin? So this is getting an abnormal mass of cells, rapidly dividing cells in your skin. It could be benign or malignant. If it doesn't spread, it's considered benign. But if it metastasizes or moves to other parts of the body, it's considered malignant. Okay, and skin cancer is actually the most common kind of cancer that you will see. So what are some different types of skin cancer? Well, there's the basal cell carcinoma. It's considered the least malignant, most common type. And it comes from your stratum basal, which again is a layer of rapidly dividing cells. So if something goes wrong there, it can turn into cancer. Okay, squamous cell carcinoma. Okay, so if it's not removed from your body, it can metastasize and go to your lymph nodes. Okay, if you remove them quickly, chances of success or cure are higher. Believed has something to do with exposure to the sun, but this cancer actually is arising from the stratum spinosum, different layer. All right, your malignant melanomas, these are deadly, right? And these actually are cancers of the melanocytes, okay, the ones that produce melanin. And they can metastasize rapidly to things like your blood vessels and your lymph vessels. Okay, so which means they can travel. Okay. And detecting them uses what we call the ABCD rule. So with A stands for asymmetry. So if you have a mole on the skin and it's asymmetric, okay, that's one thing to look for. Okay, if the borders of that mole are not smooth, that's B. C stands for color. So if you have different colors in the area where you have that mole or pigmented area, that's another sign. D is for diameter. So if the spot gets bigger than 6 millimeters, that's another thing you need to check for. All right, so developmental aspects, and we'll finish up here. So, yeah, that's also something. And so obviously if it's raised above the skin, that's also not good. As far as what I would hold you accountable for, technically, if it's in the book, if there's an E in the book, I would hold you accountable to know it. So, I'm glad you brought it up. So definitely, if you have a mole that's going above the skin level, that's not good either. So elevation, I would add that for E. All right, so with development, fortunately, when you're young, your skin's thick and well hydrated, very resilient. As you get older, skin becomes less elastic and gets thinner. So skin cancer, if you're exposed to excessive sunlight, skin cancer is a potential threat. All right, also with aging, you can get balding or graying of hair. You know, I get a little graying of my beard when I grow it out. But that's, again, hair is a part of your integumentary system. That can also be related to your genetics. But other things like medicines you take or drugs, emotional stress can affect that too. I know you've probably seen pictures of people who've been president. You know, when they start and when they finish, usually they age more than the time that they've been in office, right? Also, you may have seen pictures of people who've been on, you know, different drugs, and you know they look much older than they are. You know, obviously we're talking about illegal drugs here, but they could be 20 years old and look 40 because of the damage that is done to their body. So that's chapter 4 in a nutshell. So if you can work on your exit tickets, I'll bring y'all wipe tables. And for those of y'all who have afternoon lab, I will see you there.